Every Christmas Eve, we throw a holiday party. No one is allowed to leave for 48 hours. 1 hour till midnight, John shouted as he ran through the living room. I glanced towards the small closet in the hallway. The door had been removed and propped up against the opposite wall, as usual, and the mistletoe had been hung up in the center of the doorway. The closet was empty, and there was no light coming from inside. I held onto my glass of water, nervous. I never drank at the annual holiday party. The things we were about to see were bad enough sober, and I couldn't even imagine what it would be like if I were drunk. I looked over at Mel, who was smoking some grass, as she did every year. I'm not sure how she managed to get through the events of the night, but maybe being high helped her to process what she saw. John ran back through the living room, stopping to make sure all of the windows were locked and all of the curtains were shut. He walked over to the front door, rattling the doorknob and pulling on the door to make sure that it too was locked, before making his way into the kitchen. The rest of us, Ben, Alma, Mel and I sat around the living room in silence. Even though we had done this every year for the last 3 years, it wasn't something you could easily get used to. The horrors that we would witness tonight wouldn't be anything like the horrors from last year or the year before. We took over this ritual from our parents, who had passed it on to us when we turned 18. Ever since then, we have made sure that every year, on Christmas Eve we gather at John's house to make sure that we keep all of the holiday horrors away from the rest of you. The drugs and the food are only here to distract us, although it hardly ever works. We all gather on the day before Christmas Eve, a few minutes before midnight, and we stay inside John's house until midnight on Christmas night. It doesn't always start at the same time, but never before 1 p.m. on Christmas Eve, so we always make sure that we are inside the house and that all the exits are locked tight before the fun starts. I use the word fun very loosely here. I set my glass of water down as Mel passed by me, letting us know she was going to pee before it all started. She came back fairly quickly and plopped back down on the couch, sighing. Mel was always annoyed that we had to do this. She didn't seem as affected by it as the rest of us, and would usually spend most of the month of December complaining about the holiday party. "John," Ben shouted suddenly, "it's starting." I looked back at the closet. Ben was right, it was starting, and standing in the threshold under the mistletoe was a creature whose top half was a reindeer, with the bottom half of a nude human male. It stood there, looking towards us. Its head had a big hole where its left eye should have been, as if it had been shot there, and there was dried blood all over its face. Its left antler was broken in half, and I could see some bugs crawling around the wound in its face. "What the heck is that?" Alma whispered. No one replied. We just stood there, watching it as it watched us. It retreated back into the closet before it got down on all fours and charged towards us. I still flinched even though I knew it couldn't make it more than a few feet away from the closet. I remember asking my parents once why we had to make sure all the exits were locked, even though most of the monsters couldn't get more than a few feet away from the mistletoe. They didn't give me a direct answer, only that making sure that everything was locked guaranteed that nothing would get out. "What the heck?" Mel shouted. I continued to charge towards us, ramming into the invisible barriers each time. Then, just as it had randomly appeared, the creature randomly disappeared, and there was a few minutes of empty silence. No one said a word, but we all watched as the next creature appeared.